I sat down and I watched the behind-the-scenes / making-of feature of The Rings of Power so you don't have to. Oh boy. There is a lot to unpack, and I could give you a full rundown, but it's one of those weird series in which watching this answered a lot of the questions that I have, why things look so inconsistent, but also doesn't really serve as a real making-of. I felt like I was watching more of a promotional trailer. It's extremely artificial. Now, before we get going, I have a second channel, BBG Extra. It's random stuff that doesn't belong on here, random brain fart videos, and I hope you guys enjoy it. There's no upload schedule, it's just as and when. So, there'll be outtakes too, so you get to see some funny stuff. Now, Rings of Power, we all know, in terms of adapting Tolkien, in terms of creating something original, creating something that was truly representative of Tolkien's work, failed. The writing is bad, the costumes are bad, the sets are bad, and so many things are bad in this show that not only does it make it extremely cringeworthy, it makes it funny, and it shouldn't be. What was interesting is you could definitely see where they were CGIing over, is that a phrase, CGIing? Over people's faces. Like, there's some shots of Galadriel that look really artificial, and now we know why. But also, seeing the sets in that form, it now explains why the sets feel so small, and now explains why they look so cheap. The set design on this is not good, but it feels more like something you would see in Once Upon a Time. And and I get it, there's going to be a lot of blue and green screen. That's the nature of this type of show. But they could have expanded on these sets and made them bigger. That's one thing I will say. They could have easily done, some main pieces of the set, put them in a green room, and went from there. The costume designer of this show, it's bad. It has, a lot of the costumes have this Narnia vibe. Like, a lot of them just ring in my head from the C.S. Lewis thing. That a lot of the descriptives they seem to point out, and a lot of the themes of these costumes tend to come from there. There's something very cheap about the costumes. And when you can see the printed on main actors, not background people, because I get it, people in the background don't need 5 foot of chainmail and things, they're in the background. But when the main actors have printed on chainmail and you can see the seams, there is a problem. The weapon design also has a more Final Fantasy-esque quality to it, and everything seems to be off scale, which is also bizarre. They talk in this about adapting Tolkien and their love of Tolkien, but I don't see Tolkien in Rings of Power. If anything, I see a destruction of Tolkien. And this is the prime example. There is definitely a strong element of narcissism to this, especially amongst the showrunners and some of the actors. But the showrunners really do show their true colours, and it's almost uncomfortable. They didn't represent Tolkien's Second Age in any way. They don't even really have the rights to it, and I know people keep making that excuse in my comments. Well, they don't have the rights to it, and they're doing the best they can. No, they are not. They really are not. There is nothing good about this show, and that's the problem here. The one good actor in it has quit. And it all just seems very artificial. This making of behind the scenes, it all feels very scripted. It all feels very highly edited. And it all feels, like I said, artificial. A lot of questions have been answered. But what's really weird about it, it left me asking more questions. Because when I watched it, and I do feel like the first half of it, they're making a completely different show to the one we got. And I mean, with the showrunners with 10 years worth of failure, it kind of shows everything at this point. This show is bad. And a lot of the people that are defending it and loving it on Twitter, their entire like of the show is shipping and wanting to get off with the main characters. I have seen not safe for work Galadriel and Sauron artwork that made my made me cringe in every way possible. This is not a good show, and the making of feels like they're making something completely different. The overall very budget vibe of this so-called billion-dollar television series also shows. And when you see the costumes and the set pieces without the studio lighting, without some of the post CGI stuff and some of the editing that they did, the inconsistent color framing is hilarious. It all looks very cheap. The costumes, and I mentioned that, you have main actors on screen that look like they're in the costumes for the background actors in the extras. They're not in chainmail, they're in printed fabric, and you can see the seams. The repainted football helmets also kind of come into this, and it just feels like I'm watching a bunch of creatives' egos rather than anything else. Like I said, very artificial, very edited, very scripted vibe, and I don't know if it was, but it probably was, knowing Amazon. And I just feel like this was a promotional piece for it, rather than an actual making of behind the scenes. When you look at the Peter Jackson movies and the appendices of those works, you see this love, this passion. They could have thrown some mud at some costumes just to make them look less shiny, but you see that kind of, in Rings of Power that is, but you watch the extras on those Blu-rays and DVDs, and now this doesn't feel like that. Like, I've watched countless documentaries on creatives, on people, on artists, on films, this doesn't feel like any of them. And if anything, it has a weird propaganda-ish vibe to it, which is so strange to watch. The cultural Marxism is definitely on show here. I feel like, and this is all based on my own feelings, I know I say that a lot, but I do specify that because people get very upset in my comments. I feel like they never wanted to create Lord of the Rings. They never wanted to create Tolkien's world. They wanted to create something original. They wanted to tell an original story. And they wanted to tell their own characters, but use the names to try and create something to sell, thinking they had a ready-bought audience. And I think they also underestimated the Lord of the Rings readers and filmgoers, because they're not casual fans. These are academics. These are university professors. These are people that have spent their entire life studying these texts, ripping them apart. And this just feels childish. The main writer on this is terrible. The writing is cheesy. Everything has this very cheap vibe. And I will give some credit here. Like I said, the best actor is leaving the show, which is a real shame. But also, and I also get the feeling stuff is happening behind the scenes that no one's talking about. Just theory, not confirmed theory. I do feel like this show purely exists to disrespect and destroy Tolkien. I mean, the same people, they pitched a Conan show to them, but they wouldn't do it because, air quotes, toxic masculinity, which is ridiculous. I just feel like this works and these works exist. It just feels very cash grabby. It feels very shallow. It feels very empty, and that feels that way in that making of. They spent years working on this with a lot of drama behind the scenes, and yet they failed at doing what they should have done to start with, and it really does show. The making of is a making of two halves. The first part, I feel like, is a completely different show to what they produced, and then there's this narrative shift. And when the sort of underlining pins of social activism comes into it, it also feels very out of place and very disjointed. Now with season 2 and casting many new actors, mostly taking, I think all of them nearly are taking original roles, nothing from Tolkien's work, none of his characters, these are completely original. And the sort of toxic internet shipping culture and fetishization of this story, I mean, I've seen not safe for work. I mean, oh god. The Sauron Galadriel artwork is gross and very disrespectful. I'm like, yeah, if your entire basis of liking a show is based on getting turned on by it, there is a major problem with you, and maybe you need to seek professional help. And I know that's a controversial opinion. So, did this serve to be a making of? No. This is nothing more than an extended promotional trailer. It's shallow, it's empty, and doesn't really show anyone in a good light. It shows everyone looking really fake. So tell me what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you guys later.